You know, I've always been a man who likes his peace and quiet. My name's Ethan, and for the last 15 years, I've lived on the same patch of land, about 20 acres, just outside of the city. My property has an old cabin, a dock, and a beautiful lake that's been in my family for generations. It's not huge, but it's mine. Or at least, I thought it was. I never had much to do with the HOA. Technically, my land borders their subdivision, but I was never part of it. My granddad's deed predates that whole neighborhood by half a century. So when I'd hear their HOA gossip about fences, mailboxes, and lawn heights, I just smiled and kept to myself. That is, until one Saturday morning, when I decided to take my old fishing rod and relax by my lake. I cast my line, leaned back, and felt the morning sun on my face. Everything was perfect, until I heard the sound of an SUV pulling up behind me. When I turned around, I saw a woman in oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand, marching toward me like she was leading an army. "Excuse me," she shouted. "You can't fish here. This is private HOA property." I blinked at her, confused. "Ma'am, I own this lake. This is my property," she scoffed. "No, it's community property. For Lakewood Estates residents only." Lakewood Estates. The HOA, I almost laughed. "Lady, I've lived here since before Lakewood Estates even existed. My family built that dock in 1968. She glared at me, eyes narrowing. "Then you'll have to prove it." "I'm calling the cops." At first I thought she was bluffing, but she wasn't. Within 15 minutes, 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. The officers stepped out and asked what was going on. She immediately started ranting about a trespasser refusing to leave community property. I calmly handed one of the officers my deed and driver's license. He looked at the papers, then at her, and his expression slowly changed. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this land isn't HOA property. It's privately owned by Mr. Daniels here." She froze. For a second, I thought that would be the end of it. But instead, she turned red and shouted, "That can't be right. We use this lake. Our residents swim here. Our kids play here. It's part of the neighborhood." The officer sighed. "That doesn't make it yours." That's when I felt the first spark of anger. Because if she was right, if they had been using the lake all this time, then something didn't add up. My family never gave anyone permission. Not once. And that moment was the start of a discovery that would flip everything I knew about my property and the HOA on its head. After the cops left, I just stood there for a while, staring at the rippling water. What that woman said kept echoing in my head. We use this lake. That word we stuck with me. Because if the HOA really believed the lake was theirs, that meant they'd been coming onto my land for years. And somehow, I'd never noticed. The more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. I'd occasionally see kids swimming near the far side of the lake in summer, or people walking dogs along a trail that cut close to the water. I figured they were just friendly neighbors with permission, but apparently they thought it was their right. And if that was true, I needed to know exactly how far my land went. That night, I went into my grandfather's old study, where he kept his records and personal files. I opened an old metal cabinet that hadn't been touched in years, and there it was, a faded brown envelope with the label Property Boundaries, 1971. Inside, there was a survey map, old, yellowed, and marked with my grandfather's notes in pencil. I laid it flat on the table, tracing the borders with my finger, and my heart skipped. The map showed that the lake, the entire lake, was inside our property. Not just part of it, every inch. The path that the HOA residents used, the benches they'd installed, even that little dock on the far side, all of it was on my land. I could hardly believe it. The next morning, I called the county records office to confirm. The man on the line checked the digital maps and property records. After a moment, he chuckled and said, "Mr. Daniels, Looks like you own a bit more than you thought. The HOA's path, their benches, they're all inside your parcel, by about 50 feet. That was the moment I realized the HOA wasn't just mistaken. They'd been trespassing for years, and not just trespassing. They'd been using my property, maintaining it, and charging their residents for it. I thanked the county official, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry. They'd called the cops on me for being on my own land, while they were the ones illegally using it. So I decided to do what any reasonable man would do when he's been wronged by a group of entitled busybodies. I'd teach them a lesson in property law. I called up a local surveyor, a guy named Tim who'd done some work for me years ago. "Hey, Tim," I said, "I need you to come out here and mark my boundaries again. Every last inch. Make it visible, bright as day." He came out 2 days later with his team, and by the end of the day, there were bright orange stakes planted all around my property, from the edge of the lake to the walking trail, and even through the so-called community picnic area. You should have seen it. The place looked like a construction site. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices outside. A group of HOA residents had gathered near the water, staring at the new stakes like they'd just found a crime scene. And leading them, of course, was that same woman, clipboard and all. Her name, I'd learned by then, was Karen. She stormed right up to my driveway, waving her hands. "You can't just block off the path. This is community land." I walked out with a cup of coffee in hand and said, "Morning, Karen. Actually, it's not. It's my land, and the stakes mark my legal boundary." She snatched one of the survey ribbons and glared at me. "This has to be a mistake. The HOA pays for maintenance, for landscaping, for everything around here." That made me pause for a second. "Wait," I said. "You're telling me the HOA has been paying to maintain my property?" She looked confused but nodded. "Of course. We've been budgeting for it for years." I couldn't help but laugh. "Then I guess you've been maintaining it for me?" "I appreciate the free service." She turned bright red, sputtering something about legal action and reporting me to the board. But I just waved and went back inside. Because at that point, I wasn't angry anymore. I was curious. If they'd been maintaining my land with HOA funds, then there had to be records, budgets, maps, contracts, maybe even maintenance invoices. And if I could get my hands on that, I'd have concrete proof that they'd been trespassing and misusing funds. I didn't realize it then, but that curiosity was about to uncover something much bigger than I expected. Because when I started digging into those records, I found out the HOA had more to hide than just a few benches and trails on the wrong side of the line. They'd built part of their neighborhood, illegally, on my family's land. And once I had the evidence, I knew exactly how to make them pay for every single inch of it. The morning after my little confrontation with Karen, I couldn't shake the thought of what she said. The HOA had been paying for maintenance on my land. That meant there had to be paperwork. And where there's paperwork, there's proof. I knew better than to confront the HOA without something concrete. So, I decided to dig. That afternoon, I went down to the county office again, this time to request copies of all development permits and subdivision plans for Lakewood Estates. The clerk, a kind older gentleman named Bill, helped me sift through the digital archives. After a while, he pointed at the screen and said, "See this line here? That's your boundary. The subdivision's official plan ends right here, before the lake starts." I leaned closer. "And this," I said, tracing my finger over a shaded area, "this is the walking path they call community property?" He nodded. "Yup. Looks like that was built without any recorded easement. No permits, no right-of-way. If they've been using it, they're technically trespassing." I couldn't help but grin. "Bill, you just made my week," he chuckled. "Wouldn't be the first time an HOA overstepped their boundaries, literally." Armed with printed maps and a folder full of county documents, I drove home, feeling like I'd just uncovered buried treasure. But I wasn't stopping there. That evening, I joined a Lakewood Estates community Facebook group, under a fake account, of course. It didn't take long to find out Karen was the HOA president. She posted almost daily about community improvements and budget transparency. I scrolled through old posts and photos, and sure enough, there were pictures of residents hosting picnics and kayak races on my lake. I zoomed in on one of the photos and saw something that made me laugh out loud. Right there, behind a group of smiling residents, was my family's dock. My grandfather built that dock with his own hands 50 years ago, and they were treating it like their personal pier. The caption read, "Annual HOA Summer Bash at Lakewood Estates Lake. Community funded and maintained." Community funded, that was it. That was my angle. I saved every post, every picture, every event announcement. Over the next few days, I built a folder thicker than a law textbook. I even found the HOA's yearly budget posted online for transparency. It listed thousands of dollars spent on lakefront maintenance and public recreation area improvements, and all of it was spent on land that didn't belong to them. But the real bombshell came when I dug into the developer's original documents. Lakewood Estates wasn't supposed to have access to the lake at all. In fact, the original subdivision plan stopped short of the lake by nearly 100 feet. That extra strip of land, the part that touched the water, was mine. So how did they get away with building a walking trail and a playground there? Simple. The developer cut corners. He built it without approval, assuming nobody would notice. And when the HOA took over years later, they just kept using it, never realizing they didn't have legal access. It was like discovering your neighbor's garage was built halfway into your yard, and they'd been charging people to park there. By the end of the week, I had a file full of evidence and a plan forming in my head. I wasn't going to just tell them they were trespassing. I was going to make them feel it. I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Grace, whom I'd worked with before. I told her the whole story, sent her the documents, and waited while she reviewed them. When she called me back the next morning, I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "Ethan, this is unbelievable," she said. "They've been using your property for years without any legal right. You have grounds for compensation, and possibly even damages." I leaned back in my chair, smiling. "So what do we do next?" "Well," she said, "you have two options. You can send them a cease and desist letter and force them to stop using the land immediately. Or, if you want to make things interesting, we could invoice them retroactively for usage, maintenance, and improvements." That last part made me laugh. "You mean charge them for maintaining my land?" "Exactly," she said. "If they've been spending HOA money on your property, technically that's enrichment on your behalf. You could even file a claim for rental value of the land." I loved that idea. I told her to draft the letter. By the end of the day, Grace had it ready. A perfectly worded legal notice addressed to Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association. It detailed how their walking path, playground, and lakeside improvements were built entirely on my land, with full proof from county records. It demanded immediate cessation of use and proposed an amicable settlement, a polite way of saying, pay up or get sued. We mailed it that evening. Certified delivery. I figured that would get their attention. And boy, did it ever. Because 2 days later, my phone started ringing off the hook. The HOA wasn't just angry, they were panicking. Karen called me first. "Ethan, we received your letter. This must be some kind of mistake. Our residents depend on that land," I said calmly. "Then maybe your residents should have checked a map before calling the cops on me." She sputtered, trying to reason with me, but I'd already made up my mind. "You've got 30 days to stop using my land," I said, "or we'll take it to court." And that's when things got ugly, because instead of backing down, the HOA decided to fight back. And what they did next crossed a line I never thought they'd dare to cross. I thought once the HOA got that letter, they'd panic, maybe hire their own lawyer, and then quietly back down. After all, I had proof, law, and history on my side, but I underestimated how far a bunch of prideful, power-hungry board members would go when their reputation and control was on the line. It started small. The next morning, I woke up to find my mailbox knocked down, just lying there in the dirt, post cracked in half. At first, I figured it might have been an accident. Maybe a delivery driver hit it. But then, 2 days later, my private property signs disappeared. Every single one of them. Gone. And that wasn't all. A few days after that, I drove down to the lake and found tire tracks through the grass, deep ruts right up to the water line. My new survey flags had been pulled out and tossed into the lake. It was deliberate. Someone was trying to make a point. I knew who it was, so I installed cameras, hidden ones. Then, one afternoon, I caught them red-handed. 3 HOA members, including Karen herself, cutting through my property to access the lake. I watched them drag a canoe down the path, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I sent the footage to my lawyer. Grace was furious. "They're not just trespassing anymore," she said. "They're defying a legal notice. That's contemptible behavior, Ethan. We can escalate this." But before we could even act, the HOA decided to take their fight public. A week later, I started hearing whispers around town. People in the nearby stores and gas stations giving me funny looks. When I checked the Lakewood Estates community page, I realized why. Karen had posted a long message titled, "HOA Residents Unite Against Greedy Landowners' False Claims." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She wrote that I was trying to steal their community lake, that I was falsely claiming ownership to extort money from innocent families. She even posted a picture of me, taken from my own driveway. The comments section was wild. People called me names, accused me of lying, threatened to take back the lake. It was ridiculous, but it worked. Within days, people were showing up at my fence, yelling from across the property line. Kids throwing rocks at my dock. Someone even spray-painted "thief" on my gate. I tried to stay calm, but it was getting personal now. Grace advised me to keep everything documented. "They're digging their own grave," she said. "The more they harass you, the stronger your case becomes." So I did. Every photo, every message, every act of vandalism, I saved it all. But the real breaking point came a week later, when I went down to the lake early one morning and saw construction equipment. Parked near the trail, the HOA had hired a landscaping crew to restore the path on my land. I walked right up to the workers and asked who hired them. One of them, clearly uncomfortable, said, HOA president. Said this was part of community maintenance." I smiled thinly. "Did she show you a permit?" He looked at me like I'd asked him to explain rocket science. "A what?" I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You're trespassing on private property. You might want to call your boss." That's when Karen came marching down the trail, phone in hand, shouting, "You can't stop this. This is public space. Everyone knows it." I turned the camera on her. "Karen, this land is legally mine. You've been served notice. You're violating it. Again." She snatched at my phone, but I stepped back. "Keep your hands off my property, Karen," I said quietly. She froze, realizing I wasn't bluffing this time. Then she smirked. "You think you can bully us with your fancy lawyer? You'll regret this. We have the community on our side." That was when I realized she didn't care about being right or wrong. She cared about winning. I called Grace as soon as I got home. "I want to escalate," I said. "No more warnings. Let's hit them with everything we've got." She didn't hesitate. "All right. We'll file for an injunction and a property rights suit. Once the court sees your evidence, they'll have to stop." And we did. Within 48 hours, the HOA was served with a formal cease and desist injunction. The documents detailed every trespass, every illegal structure, every unauthorized maintenance expense. It was ironclad. For a brief moment, it felt like I'd finally won. But I should have known better. Because Karen and her HOA board weren't done. If they couldn't win legally, they'd try to bury me another way. They filed a counterclaim, accusing me of fraud, harassment, and interfering with community peace. And just like that, things exploded into a full-scale legal war. What started with a fishing trip had turned into a courtroom battle that would expose secrets no one in Lakewood Estates ever wanted to come out. Because the deeper we dug into their records, the more we realized this wasn't just about a lake. It was about lies, corruption, and money. Lots of it. And I was about to uncover every last piece. After Karen's arrest, the whole neighborhood fell silent. For months, Lakewood Estates had been buzzing with gossip, finger-pointing, and HOA drama. But suddenly, there was nothing. No newsletters, no patrols, no threats of fines taped to mailboxes. Just quiet. It was almost eerie. Grace told me that most of the HOA board had resigned within a week of the arrests. The community was in chaos, meetings canceled, funds frozen, and no one really knowing who was in charge anymore. Some residents celebrated the downfall, others whispered that I had destroyed the neighborhood. I didn't care what they thought. For the first time in years, I could finally walk around my lake without anyone telling me I didn't belong there. The first morning I went down, mist hung over the water, sunlight glimmering through the trees. It was beautiful, but it was also broken. Trash littered the edges. Benches and picnic tables were half-rotted. Someone had even tried to build a wooden platform into the lake and left it half-finished, the planks warped and sinking. This was the community area the HOA had bragged about. I stood there for a while, just taking it all in. The mess, the silence, the strange calm that followed chaos. Then I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. At first, it was just me. I rented a small excavator to remove the junk, then brought in gravel to rebuild the walking path that had eroded over time. I restored the old dock my grandfather had built decades ago, the one the HOA had nearly torn down to make room for their fishing platform. It was exhausting, dirty work, but it felt right. Every nail I hammered and every board I replaced was a reminder. This was my land again. A few days into the project, I started getting visitors. Some were curious, some were apologetic. Tom, the former vice president who'd testified against Karen, showed up with a coffee and said quietly, "We owe you an apology, Ethan. A lot of us do." I looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "You stood up when it mattered." "That counts for something," he smiled faintly. "The community's going to try to rebuild without an HOA this time. Maybe do it the right way. Voluntary association. No power trips. No fines. I thought you should know." I appreciated that. But I wasn't interested in joining anything anymore. For me, this wasn't about rebuilding a neighborhood. It was about restoring a legacy. Later that week, an older woman named Helen, one of the longtime residents, stopped by while I was hauling driftwood out of the lake. She handed me a photo, an old black-and-white picture of the lake taken in the 1970s. "This used to be our favorite spot," she said. "Before all the rules, before the signs, we'd have picnics right here. Your grandfather would bring his boat out and take the kids fishing. It was simpler." I looked at the photo. There was my grandfather, smiling, his arm around a group of laughing neighborhood kids. "Thank you," I said quietly. That photo went up on my cabin wall that night. Over the next month, the place began to transform. The lake was clean again, the dock repaired, the trees trimmed. I even installed a few solar lights along the path so people could walk by safely at night. Not because they deserved it, but because my grandfather would have wanted it that way. Word spread quickly. People began showing up again, carefully, respectfully this time. Parents brought their kids to fish. Couples sat quietly at sunset. Some even left notes of thanks on my porch. One day, I came home to find a wooden sign leaning against my fence. Hand-painted, it said, "Thank you for bringing the lake back to life." I didn't know who left it, but it meant more than any settlement or legal victory ever could. Then, one afternoon, Grace called. "Got some news," she said. The DA wrapped up the investigation. Karen and Janet both took plea deals. They'll be paying restitution, part of which goes directly to you for the damages. I laughed softly. After everything, I finally get a check from the HOA. That's poetic. Grace chuckled. You earned it, Ethan. You didn't just win a case. You exposed corruption and helped your community, even if they don't all see it yet. I thanked her and hung up, walking back to the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water gold. For the first time, I felt at peace. Not victorious, not vengeful, just home. But as life slowly returned to normal, something unexpected happened. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name and my lake property listed on the envelope. Inside was a short note and a photocopy of a very old map. The note read, "There's more to your grandfather's land than you realize. Look under the old boathouse foundation. The truth is buried there. No signature. Just that message." I stared at the letter for a long time. The old boathouse had collapsed. Decades ago, just a few planks and pilings, left by the northern edge of the lake. I hadn't thought about it since I started restoring the area. But now, it felt like the next chapter was waiting to be uncovered. And if history had taught me anything, it was that this lake held more secrets than anyone ever imagined. That letter haunted me for days. I left it on my kitchen counter, glanced at it every morning, and told myself it was probably a prank. Maybe someone from the old HOA trying to mess with me one last time. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and whoever wrote it knew about the old boathouse, which had been forgotten for decades. Even most of the neighbors didn't know it had existed. So one Saturday morning, I decided to find out. The old boathouse sat on the far northern edge of the lake, where the shore curved into a small cove surrounded by thick willow trees. The structure had collapsed long ago. All that was left were moss-covered beams jutting out of the mud and a few scattered boards. I brought a shovel, a pry bar, and a flashlight. At first, it just felt like digging through memories. I uncovered a few rusted nails, an old boat hook, and what looked like part of a fishing net. But then, about a foot down, my shovel hit something solid. A box. It was old, wooden, with metal bands along the edges, corroded from years underground. I knelt down, brushed away the dirt, and lifted it out carefully. It wasn't locked, but it took effort to pry open. Inside, wrapped in a thick, oil-stained cloth, was a small stack of papers. I unrolled them slowly, heart pounding. The top sheet was a property deed, dated 1962, signed by Arthur Langley, my grandfather. It wasn't just for the lake. It was for nearly the entire stretch of land that would later become Lakewood Estates. But what really caught my eye was the second page, a contract. It was between my grandfather and a development company called Silverline Properties, the company that had built the neighborhood in the 1980s. The agreement stated that Arthur had leased a portion of his land for development, with one key condition: the lake and its shoreline would always remain under his ownership, and no organization could claim it as communal property without his heirs' written consent. That clause was underlined, initialed, and notarized. It was bulletproof. I sat there staring at it, realizing what it meant. The HOA's claim that the lake was community property had never been true. Not from the beginning, but there was more. At the bottom of the pile was a sealed envelope, brittle with age. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. For Ethan. When you're ready to know. My throat tightened. My grandfather had died when I was 12. How could he have written something for me back then? I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means the lake has changed hands again, and you found what I hoped you would. This land has always been special, not because of its value, but because of what it represents. I built this place for family and for peace. When the developers came, I thought I could protect both by making a deal. I was wrong. The people who took over this land twisted it into something ugly. They built fences, rules, and power games around a place that was meant to be shared in kindness. If they ever try to take what's yours, know this: you have the truth on your side. The lake belongs to us, not because of money or papers, but because of legacy. And one more thing. Check the metal box under the dock. I froze. There was another box? I folded the letter, tucked it into my jacket, and headed toward the dock, the one I had just rebuilt weeks earlier. Beneath it the water was shallow, only about knee-deep. I rolled up my jeans, grabbed the flashlight again, and waded in. It didn't take long. The light reflected off something metallic under one of the old foundation beams. I reached down, pried it loose, and pulled out a smaller metal container, about the size of a lunchbox. This one was sealed with a latch and padlock. The lock was rusted, but it broke easily with the pry bar. Inside were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and one small, water-damaged tape recorder. The photos showed the lake's early days, construction crews, families, and my grandfather standing beside a man in a suit with the Silver Line logo on his briefcase. Then, among the papers, I found a letter addressed to Silver Line Board of Directors. It accused the company of forging documents, selling parcels illegally, and violating environmental permits. My grandfather had discovered they'd falsified ownership maps to sell off parts of his land without his approval. In other words, the HOA's existence was built on a lie. I played the old tape. And though the sound was faint and warped, I could make out my grandfather's voice. They think they can hide the truth forever, but I've kept the record safe. Someday, someone will uncover it. And when they do, this place will belong to my family again. I stood there in the fading light, listening to that crackling voice echo across the water. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice and history. The next day, I called Grace. When she heard the details, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Ethan, if what you found is authentic, this doesn't just protect your land. It could nullify the HOA's entire legal standing. They built their authority on a fraudulent foundation." I exhaled slowly. "So what do we do?" "We make it public," she said. "The state attorney's office is still investigating the HOA's finances. If we give them this, they'll have reason to go after the developers, too." And that's exactly what we did. We scanned every document, had the deed and letters authenticated, and submitted them to the state's land registry and the Attorney General's office. Within weeks, an investigation was reopened, not just into the HOA, but into the entire history of Lakewood Estates' development. The headlines hit local news first. Historic property fraud exposed in Lakewood Estates. Decades of illegal land sales uncovered. Neighbors who once called me a thief now came to my door, humbled and apologetic. Some even brought food, flowers, or just simple notes saying, "I'm sorry. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just went down to the lake that evening, stood by the water, and whispered, 'You were right, Grandpa. You were right all along.' But even as peace returned, something still nagged at me. The letter, the one that led me to the boathouse, had no name, no signature, no clue as to who sent it. Someone out there knew these secrets before I did. And I had a feeling. They weren't done yet. The mystery of that unsigned letter wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to move on. I really did. The lake was finally peaceful. The investigation was in full swing, and my name had been cleared. But every time I passed the old boathouse, I'd find myself thinking about that note. Look under the old boathouse foundation. The truth is buried there. Whoever wrote it knew exactly where to point me. It wasn't random. It wasn't luck. One evening, I sat at my desk with the letter under a lamp, examining every inch of it. The handwriting was careful, steady, old-fashioned. It reminded me of something, but I couldn't place it. Then I noticed a faint watermark on the paper. R.H. Paper Co. That name rang a bell. My grandfather used to buy stationery from a small supply store in town called Ridge Hardware. Initials R.H. That store had been closed for decades, but the old owner's son, Charlie Ridge, still ran an antique shop downtown. I figured it was a long shot, but I had to ask. So the next morning, I drove into town. The bell above the antique shop door jingled as I walked in. Charlie, a man in his 70s with kind eyes and silver hair, looked up from behind the counter. "Ethan Langley," he said with a grin. "Haven't seen you in years. How's the lake treating you?" I smiled faintly. "Better now, thanks. Actually, I came about something strange." I showed him the letter. He adjusted his glasses and studied it for a while. Then he nodded. "Yep, that's our paper all right. Haven't seen this stock in decades. Any idea who might have bought some recently?" I asked. He chuckled. "Son, that paper's been out of circulation since the 80s. If someone used it now, it either came from an old box or someone who held onto it for sentimental reasons." I frowned. "So maybe someone connected to my grandfather?" Charlie hesitated. "Could be. Your granddad used to buy stacks of this stuff back in the day. Wrote letters, kept journals. You might want to check the Historical Society records. He was close with one of the clerks there, a lady named Margaret." "Margaret Bell?" I asked. He nodded. "That's the one. Retired years ago, but her niece works there now. Nice girl. Goes by Anna." That name hit me harder than I expected. I knew an Anna Bell. She'd lived near the neighborhood growing up. Quiet, bookish, a few years older than me. Could it be the same person? I decided to find out. The Lakewood Historical Society was tucked inside an old courthouse building, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and old books. When I walked in, a woman at the desk looked up, and sure enough, it was her, Anna Bell. She recognized me instantly. "Ethan Langley." "Wow, it's been a long time," I smiled. "Yeah, I heard you were running this place now." "Trying to keep history alive," she said with a laugh. "So what brings you here?" I slid the letter across the desk. "I think you might have sent this." She blinked, surprised. Then she picked it up, reading it carefully. Her face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "It was left in my mailbox a few weeks ago. No return address." Led me to the old boathouse, where I found my grandfather's letters and deeds. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she took a deep breath and said quietly, "I didn't send that, but I think I know who did." I leaned forward. "Who?" She glanced toward the back room. "Come with me." We walked into a dusty archive room filled with boxes and filing cabinets. She pulled out a worn folder labeled Silverline Properties, 1981-1986. "These are copies of the developer's original submissions to the county," she said. "Your grandfather's name appears all over them." "But there's something else." She opened the folder to reveal a stack of memos, all signed by the same person, Richard Langley. My stomach dropped. That was my father's name. "But my dad never worked for Silverline," I said. "He was a teacher." Anna hesitated. "Not always. Before he met your mother, he interned there. He handled real estate documentation, zoning maps, title transfers, things like that. He would have known everything about the lake's ownership." I stared at the papers in disbelief. "Are you saying my dad was involved in This? She shook her head quickly. Not the fraud. The opposite. He tried to expose it. There's a note here, from him to your grandfather. She handed me a single yellowed page. It read, Dad, Silverline's changing the maps again. They're removing your clause from the deed records. I warned the board it's illegal, but they told me to keep quiet. I'm saving copies of everything. If they bury the truth, I'll make sure you get the evidence. Richard. I sank into a chair, the air leaving my lungs. My father had known. He'd tried to stop them. And after all these years, someone, maybe a friend, maybe one of his old contacts, had carried out his last promise to make sure I found the truth. Anna sat beside me quietly. Your father wasn't just trying to protect your grandfather. He was trying to protect you. He knew one day this would fall to your family. I rubbed my face, overwhelmed. Then who sent the letter? Anna hesitated again. There's one person who might have had both the access to these records and the motive. My aunt, Margaret Bell. Before she died, she left a sealed envelope in the Society's archives labeled for the rightful owner of Langley Lake. My pulse quickened. Do you still have it? She nodded slowly. Yes, and, Ethan, she left it to be opened only if you came looking for it. She retrieved a small, weathered envelope and handed it to me. I opened it carefully. Inside was another note, written in elegant, fading cursive. To the heir of Arthur Langley. The truth was hidden once, but not forgotten. Your family's fight was noble. I've kept the trail alive until someone brave enough came to finish it. The lake is yours, but so is the burden that comes with it. Others will still want it. Protect it well. MB. I folded the letter, my heart pounding. The mystery was finally coming together. My grandfather had built it. My father had tried to save it. And Margaret Bell, a woman I never even met, had protected their secret for decades. But that last line stuck with me. Others will still want it. I looked at Anna. What did she mean by that? Anna's expression turned serious. Ethan. The Silverline Corporation never fully dissolved. A new company, Silverline Holdings, bought up their assets 5 years ago. And guess what's listed in their current development plans? I swallowed hard. What? She turned her monitor toward me. There on the screen was a blueprint labeled Lakewood Expansion Project, Phase 2, and right in the center was my lake. When I saw that blueprint glowing on Anna's monitor, my stomach turned to ice. There it was, in black and white. Lakewood Expansion Project, Phase 2. The new developer, Silverline Holdings, had drawn up plans for luxury villas, a clubhouse, and even a private marina, all centered around my lake. Anna's voice broke through my shock. They've already submitted proposals to the county for zoning adjustments. It's still early, but once those approvals go through, they'll have the green light to start construction. I leaned in. And they're claiming the lake as part of their property? She nodded grimly. Exactly. The application states it's previously communal land, citing records from the old HOA's fraudulent maps. Even after all the truth had come out, they were still trying to twist history. I thanked Anna, took a copy of everything she had, and called Grace the moment I stepped outside. She answered on the second ring. Ethan, you sound like you've seen a ghost. I just saw something worse, I said. Silverline Holdings. They're back. And they're trying to develop the lake. There was a long pause. Then Grace said, Send me everything. We'll shut them down before they even start. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept flashing back to my grandfather's letter. Protect it well. It felt like history was repeating itself. The next morning, Grace and I met in her office downtown. She'd already been digging into the company's records. Silverline Holdings was founded 6 years ago, she explained, by a man named David Hawthorne, former legal counsel for the original Silverline properties. I clenched my jaw. So it's the same people, just a new name? Exactly. They've been buying back parcels of land around the old estates, quietly, strategically. But your property is the key piece. Without it, their development plan collapses. So they're trying to steal it again. Grace nodded. And this time they're better funded, better connected. But we have something they don't. Documented proof of the fraud and your grandfather's original deed. That gives us leverage. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Grace reached out to the county land board to freeze any development applications tied to my parcel. Meanwhile, I called in a favor from a local journalist who had covered the earlier HOA scandal. By the next morning, headlines began circulating again. Developer linked to HOA fraud. Attempts to reclaim disputed lake. That hit them where it hurt. Within 24 hours, I received a call. A slick, confident voice on the other end. Mr. Langley, this is David Hawthorne with Silverline Holdings. I believe we have some business to discuss. I could practically hear the smirk through the phone. There's no business between us, I said. You're trespassing on my family's legacy. He chuckled softly. Now let's not get emotional. We're simply interested in acquiring your land at a generous price, well above market value. You'd be wise to consider it. Not for sale, I replied. There was a pause. Then his tone hardened. You're making a mistake, Mr. Langley. You think those old papers will protect you? You're dealing with a corporation now, not a homeowners club. We have the resources to make this process very unpleasant, I smiled coldly. You can try, but I've already gone through worse. And I hung up. For the next few weeks, things escalated fast. Silverline's surveyors started showing up near my property line again, pretending to inspect boundaries. Trucks parked on the roadside. Drones flew overhead, taking aerial footage of the lake. It was intimidation. The corporate version of bullying. So, I fought back the same way my grandfather would have. With proof, Grace helped me file an injunction, preventing any corporate access to the lake. Then we leaked documents to the press, records showing Silverline's ties to the fraudulent maps, the old HOA's illegal annexations, and even email chains between Hawthorne and Karen from before her arrest. The story blew up. News outlets started calling it the Lakewood cover-up. Protesters gathered outside Silverline's headquarters. The county commissioners announced a public hearing to review all ownership claims. It all came down to that hearing. When the day arrived, the courtroom was packed. Cameras, reporters, angry residents. The whole town had turned out. Hawthorne sat across from me, sharp suit, smug expression, flanked by a team of lawyers. Grace sat beside me, calm but fierce. The commissioner began. Mr. Langley, you're claiming sole ownership of the lake based on historic deed evidence? Yes, sir, I said. This land has belonged to my family since 1962. Silverline's maps were fraudulent. The HOA's claims were built on those false records. I have proof. Grace handed over the original deed, the letters, and the notarized contract. The commissioner reviewed them carefully. And these have been authenticated by the state? Yes, Your Honor. Then Hawthorne stood. With all due respect, Your Honor, these old documents are irrelevant. The community has used this lake for decades. Precedent establishes shared access rights. Grace leaned forward. Precedent built on fraud isn't precedent. It's trespass. A murmur rippled through the room. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Mr. Langley's motives are clear. He wants to keep the lake for himself, denying generations of residents access to a natural resource. I stood up. That's not true. My grandfather welcomed everyone, until Silverline stole from him. I'm not taking the lake away from the community. I'm taking it back from people like you. The room erupted in applause. Even the commissioner had to call for order. After several tense hours, the decision came down. The commissioner cleared his throat and said, Based on the evidence presented, This board recognizes Ethan Langley as the sole legal owner of the lake and surrounding property. All development proposals from Silverline Holdings are hereby denied. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. Grace squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "You did it." But across the room, Hawthorne didn't look defeated. He looked calculating. As the room emptied, he walked up to me, expression smooth as glass. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You may have won the land, but the story's not finished. You have no idea what you're standing on, Langley." And then he left. Those words stuck with me. You have no idea what you're standing on. That night, back at the lake, I stood by the water again, moonlight rippling across its surface. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I looked toward the far shore, where the trees swayed softly, and something caught my eye. A faint glow, like light seeping from the ground near the old trail. I frowned, walked closer, and there, half buried in the mud, was a metal hatch. Old, rusted, but real. It hadn't been on any map I'd seen, not even in my grandfather's records. As I knelt down beside it, brushing away the dirt, I saw faint letters etched into the metal. Property of Silverline Research Division. My heart started pounding. Whatever this was, whatever secret my grandfather, my father, and now Silverline had been tied to, it was buried here, and it wasn't over. The hatch stared up at me like a dark promise. I knelt there, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. Years of family history, decades of lies, battles with the HOA, Silverline's schemes. It all led to this moment. I pried the rusted metal open. The hinges groaned in protest, and a cold, musty smell wafted up. The opening revealed a narrow stone staircase leading down into the earth. My flashlight beam swept over old machinery, pipes, valves, and panels covered in dust and cobwebs. The water level inside was low, but enough to reflect the dim light. I stepped carefully. Descending into the hidden chamber at the far end, I found it. A steel vault embedded into the wall, locked but surprisingly intact. The padlock was old, corroded, but I forced it open with my pry bar. Inside were stacks of documents, old photographs, and files labeled Project Silverline, Langley Lake Initiative. I picked up the first folder. It detailed experiments conducted by Silverline decades ago. Unauthorized environmental testing, illegal chemical runoff studies, and covert manipulation of local water sources. My grandfather had discovered it, documented it, and hidden the evidence before Silverline could destroy it. The photographs showed engineers and scientists in protective gear, dumping containers into the lake, measuring water contamination and taking soil samples. Some of the faces were familiar from the old HOA records. They were the same people who had built the fraudulent HOA system to cover their tracks. My grandfather had known the lake was being poisoned, and he had hidden the proof to protect future generations. I flipped through the files and found something that made my blood run cold. A set of names, including Karen, Janet, and even Hawthorne, all listed as board members, developers, or collaborators. It wasn't just about land. It was about control, about covering up crimes that could have destroyed the ecosystem and profiting while pretending to protect the community. I exhaled slowly, running my hands over the papers. Then, tucked at the bottom of the vault, was a small leather-bound journal. I opened it carefully. The first page was written in my grandfather's hand. If you are reading this, Ethan, it means the lake has finally come back into our hands. But be warned, those who built lies around this water will not stop until they regain power. Protect it not only for yourself, but for everyone who belongs to it. There were instructions, too. Notes on how to restore the lake's ecosystem, reverse the environmental damage, and safeguard the land legally against any future claims. My grandfather had prepared for every contingency. And then I found the last entry, chilling in its clarity. Silverline's reach extends far beyond this town. One day, they will try again. Trust no one outside the family. The lake is more than property. It is legacy. It is proof. It is truth. Guard it well. I leaned back, breathless. It all made sense now. Every trespass, every legal battle, every letter from mysterious allies. It had been a centuries-long fight to protect not just land, but the truth. Suddenly, I realized what Hawthorne had meant when he said, "You have no idea what you're standing on." He wasn't threatening me. He was right. I hadn't just inherited a lake. I had inherited decades of secrets, crimes, and responsibility. But as I looked around the chamber, illuminated by my flashlight, I felt something else too. Resolve. I picked up the documents, photographs, and the journal, and carefully brought them back to the surface. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, peaceful for the first time in decades. I made a silent promise. I would protect this lake. I would honor my grandfather's work, and I would ensure that the legacy of lies, greed, and corruption never touched this place again. Because now I knew the truth, and the truth was more powerful than any corporation, any HOA, or any board member could ever be. As I stood there, looking out over the calm water, I realized something profound. I hadn't just reclaimed a lake. I had reclaimed my family's honor, and whatever came next, I was ready. The lake belonged to me, to my family, and to the generations that would follow. And for the first time, I felt the weight of that responsibility, and the satisfaction of knowing I had finally earned it. That's all for today, folks. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.